Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to start by looking at the policy and guidelines on racism and racial discrimination as put out by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And if you just open the document and get past the policy page and the table of contents, you would come to 1.1 of the policy document. And I'm just going to read it to you because this is informing our next story, okay? The code states that it is public policy in Ontario to recognize the inherent dignity and worth of every person and to provide for equal rights and opportunities without discrimination. The provisions of the code are aimed at creating a climate of understanding and mutual respect for the dignity and worth of each person so that each person feels a part of the community and feels able to contribute to the community. Every person in Ontario has a right to be free from racial discrimination and harassment in the social areas of employment, services, goods, facilities, housing accommodation, contracts, and membership in trade and vocational associations. Contracts is what I want to highlight here. And here's the announcement yesterday made by, this is Bardish Chagger, but Trudeau's the one making the announcement. And I highlighted this tweet because I want to come back to it and read this. I see what's going on here. I hope you do too. Okay, so this is Chagger's announcement. We're going to read this article and then we're going to come back and read this little statement here. Okay, so Chagger says, this program was created in collaboration with Black-led organizations because Black Canadians know what their communities need best. This is another step towards removing the systemic barriers that exist within our society to create a truly inclusive Canada. They always say systemic barriers. They're never clear on exactly what those systemic barriers are. If you identify a problem, say this is a barrier because of this and we should do this instead, or just identify it and say we should think about ways to solve this problem. Instead, if you say we're going to solve all the problems, all the systemic problems that we know are true and exist, we're going to solve them all, definitely. That's not solving a problem, nor is it even identifying a problem. It's just blowing sunshine out your rear, right? And so that's all Chagger's doing here, right? Systemic barriers that exist. Oh, sure they do. Could you name one? Please? Okay. Trudeau announces cash for loans support to Black Canadian entrepreneurs. This is in violation of the Human Rights Code 1.1. Okay. Black Canadians who want to start or expand a business will have access to loans and support for training and mentorships under a new federal program unveiled by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Toronto on Wednesday. The $221 million program, jointly funded by the federal government and 8 financial institutions, is the first of its kind to help Black businesses on a national scale. It responds to one of the requests made in June by an open letter from the Parliamentary Black Caucus that was signed by more than 100 MPs and senators. Trudeau said the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on the systemic gaps and economic barriers Black Canadians face every day, and that his government wants a pandemic recovery that is inclusive and equitable for all Canadians. So, as I said, if you say there are systemic gaps, but you can't identify one, and if your identification of one is jumping 6 feet, right, Gail? Gail will get out here any minute and tell us what the rest of the discrimination is, or the racism is. You don't have a case, right? Like you don't have anything to fix. We're throwing money at something. I think that maybe your business should stand on its own and not on the color of your skin, right? Like if your business is good enough, it'll work, right? And that's great. I love businesses to work. And I love loans for businesses, but I don't like loans that are tied to your skin color. That seems like discrimination. Like racism. Hi, I'd like to have a loan. Oh, great, sit down. Well, the only loans you might qualify for is this one here, sir. But unfortunately, there's one qualification that you lack. Do you have any friends who are a little darker? Can you say, do you have any Black friends? In this context, the bank guy is asking, do you have any Black friends that, you could put the business in their name by any chance? This is the only one you qualify for and you're just not Black enough. Do you have any Black parents? How is this okay? How is this just fine? How is this not being questioned by the CTV News? It's just fine, no problem. The systemic gaps, yeah, we've got you, Mr. Trudeau. We understand what you're talking about. How's we going, by the way? We'll get there in a minute. Okay, so the systemic gaps barriers, equitable for all Canadians, and a little more equitable if you have a Black friend, or in fact are yourself Black, right? Okay, starting a business. Okay. And quote, an investment in Black excellence is an investment in economic empowerment, and economic empowerment is an essential part of justice, he said. It's justice against a system that has locked out for far too many Black entrepreneurs and denied them the same opportunities as other Canadians. Do you have any examples? This is word salad, by the way. This is trying to get justice in there. Sounds good, working for law and order, despite Toronto's guns and gang violence, and we'll look at that at the end of the video as well, right? So that's what that's about. Word salad to get justice, and he sounds like a Law and Order kind of guy, but he's not at all. Soft on crime is Justin Trudeau. Back to this. Ottawa is putting up $93 million over the next 4 years for the Black Entrepreneurship Program, while banks are contributing $128 million for loans between $25,000 and $250,000 for Black business owners. Ooh, you qualify, but not quite. The federal cash will include $33 million towards the loans, $6.5 million to collect data on the barriers preventing Black Canadians from succeeding in business. Isn't that racist? $6.5 million. Who gets the $6.5 million? Are they paying the banks and financial institutions for the failed business data to learn more about why Black Canadians are being prevented from succeeding in business? And it seems weird to have the next part, $53 million for Black business organizations to provide mentorship, financial planning, and business training from their long history of success, as cited by the line before, the $6.5 million to figure out why it's not so successful. Like, does nobody else see the insanity here? Am I the only one? Holy cow, okay? And just like, open the human rights. That seems a little racist. I'll just have a look at the basic guidelines for, like, a big province, a well-populated province. Really? Really? Okay. And I alluded to we. So that's the end of that. I think that Justin Trudeau's government is horribly racist. They're turning on the taps to divide Canadians. Oh, I said I was going to go back. I'm glad I did that. Okay. So I said, we see what's going on here. I hope you see what's going on here. And here is a Twitter user, Patty B, and he says, because we live in a global economy, and this is cut and pasted. This is a source that I don't know, but I read this and I believe this to be true. So here we go. Because we live in a global economy and because information is readily available, it is fair to say that political parties in Western countries are entirely aware of the results of their actions. There is no question that modern identity politics as practiced by the Liberal Party of Canada causes an increase in division and hostility within a population. This leads to real racism and to real violence, always. This is exactly what you would expect to happen if you were to divide a harmonious population and one that was based on the individual into identifiable groups and then tell some of those groups that they are oppressed victims of other groups. The next step is to send an army of marketers out to tell all the oppressed groups that they are the best represented by your political party. It's the ultimate sales tool. You create the problem and you also offer the solution. The problem with this is that you end up getting people killed and ruining your society in the process. However, the people who are always clamoring to speak for other people never seem to care about this detail as long as they manage to acquire power. And we're watching this in real time with the Democrats in the United States. Their cities are being torn apart by violent riots, and they're saying that they're peaceful protesters. I can't imagine. And I mean, looking at John Tory's Toronto, here's news. This was going to be the end, but I'm going to put this in here because it's important and makes sense here. Police say there have been 350 shootings in the city since the beginning of the year. Of those, 168 people have been hit by bullets. They're updating the public this morning on the increase in violence. Project Compound is specifically focused on gun violence in Thorncliffe Park. Last Thursday, a number of search warrants were executed at 9 places in Toronto and Cambridge. A group of extremely violent group of individuals has been arrested, according to police. Overall, 11 people ranging from 19 to 31 were arrested. My question is, how quickly were they let out on bail? This is Joe Warmington, and he says, do you want to hear more about the shootings overnight, including people struck in a patio watching Raptors game, or more on the guy beaten on Yonge Street, or about someone taken to hospital after a dog attacked a homeless encampment at a downtown park? The violence in Toronto these days is just incredible. And my goodness, like the divisive rhetoric of our leadership and the grouping of people and the victim enabling, feeding them that line is just, it's getting to the point of a fever pitch, right? It's just, the rhetoric is so obvious. It's right there. And I don't know if, is it just me? Am I the only one who sees this? Anyway, moving on, Here's something to consider during these stories. First Morneau, now the Kielburgers cut and run. Nothing shady about this at all. So Craig and his brother Mark Kielburger, are shutting down the Canadian operations, and this was reported by Canadaland. Canadaland broke this story on August 30th as they said a new statement about the history of we was added to its website over the weekend, concluding with this paragraph, and it basically says the lasting emotion we'll take away from the last 25 years is gratitude. So they're winding up, and it's official. They are winding up. So Canadaland We Charity is winding down its Canadian operations. Two sources tell Canadaland. Here's a quick interview, and they just say, oh well, we're spending more money than we're taking in, and you just can't run a business like that, right? So big CTV national interview and the whole shebang. You can watch that. I'm not going to show that right now. But here's Jesse Brown. He's the guy who runs Canadaland. He's broken a lot of these stories. Actually, he's probably to credit for breaking the We story. And he says, We Charity's closing. What about Me to We? We 365 GP, We 365 Holdings, Me to We Trips, Me to We Shop, Me to We Foundation, Me to We Asset Holdings, We Charity Foundation, Wellbeing Foundation, Numbered Ontario Corporation, Me to We, Consumables, etc. I say keep your eye on the ball, but where is it? Yeah, very interesting. And really, they have a lot of money in real estate, and they could not open another thing, and they're sitting on real estate holdings they're valuable real estate holdings, very valuable, and the value of Canadian real estate is not declining, especially in major cities like Toronto. And with the government being willing to buy office buildings to transfer them into housing. Well, there you go. The real estate retains its value or increases all the time. Here's an Ontario-centric story. Doug Ford at the Ontario Summit 2020, Francois Legault and I committed to meet annually to advance our shared priorities. Our greatest provinces will continue, our great provinces, sorry, it doesn't say greatest. Our great provinces will continue to advocate and work with the federal government for the issues that matter to most Ontarians, Quebecers, and all Canadians. And the video is kind of cheesy. It's just like, we were here and we had a meeting. Ontario's fiscal watchdog to report on provincial federal COVID-19 spending. This was requested by the Ontario Legislature's Standing Committee on Finance, and they wanted a snapshot of like what the Ontario spending looks like, because we were in debt. We were in debt $350 billion thanks to Kathleen Wynne and that crew. So it's not like we didn't have a debt going into this. And one of the saving graces of the small federal debt was that you could look at that and say, well, $350 billion for the almost the total debt of where you live, that's not bad. And in the world, the banking and those institutions are looked at, Canadian banking institutions are looked at pretty well, despite all the money laundering that's going on in them currently. But now that we've got basically the same level of debt federally, we've doubled our debt basically. And so I'm interested to see what Ontario's debt looks like after the COVID spending. So keep a watchful eye on that. There's going to be interesting numbers coming out there. Here's Pierre Paliev, and he says, OECD job data out. Canada has the highest unemployment in the G7. Yeah, we're up around 10%, 10 or 11%. 10.7 was the last I saw, but it might have gone back up to 11. So these aren't good indicators, right? These are things that are going to make it difficult for us being the country and us being as a province to get the economy moving again. And you can only print and spend money for so long before the economy needs to actually pick up and do it. Like you can only have the economy on life support for so long. So I don't know how long that is. According to Yves Giroux, maybe 2 years, but who knows, right? Like I don't know. I really don't. And I don't think Mr. Giroux knows either. I think this is uncharted territory, and the territory that it looks like, if you were to compare it to something else, well, you want to stop those comparisons as quickly as possible, right? You don't want to start making those comparisons. That's dangerous. Okay, moving on. Speaking of dangerous, here's Calgary Herald, and they're saying Calgary academics to take part in national anti-racism strike with university support. Don't send your kids to university. They will fundamentally change the way they think, and not in a good way. This is a struggle session. This is not a good thing. Universities are meant to specialize the education and to challenge the mind, not to indoctrinate. And this is indoctrination. The University of Calgary and Mount Royal University have expressed support for professors taking part in a national anti-racism strike over the next 2 days, inspired by strikes by professional sports athletes to promote anti-racism. I'd love to see what the actual definition of anti-racism is. Who's got that? Somebody link it in the comments. And I've read this. So there's like sociologists who have come up with definitions, and there's a couple of websites that I've referenced for this, but like I'm talking working documents for like Ontario or the federal government. Have they defined this term, or are they just using it fly by night? Is this like a term that papers using? Is this the school using this? Where is the school's definition of this? The University of Calgary and Mount Royal. How can they use these terms if they're not defined? Because if they're not defined, they mean anything. Back to this. The scholars' strike in Canada runs from September 9th to 10th and is a public call for racial justice and end to anti-Black police violence. That's very specific, and adds a specific focus on anti-Indigenous colonial violence. Examples, please. Examples, please. So here's the University of Guelph doing the same thing. University of Guelph officially launches mandatory anti-oppression, anti-racism training. I don't know if this is for professors or students, but it's in the same vein. And I'm not sure if they're taking part in the strike, or what is this called? Yeah, the anti-racism strike. But it's in the same spirit. And I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for universities to be indoctrinating like that. Regardless, moving on. Parks closed. Moving into COVID. City TV News is reporting parks closed, tickets for partying as Kingston deals with returning students. And massive crowds and parties in an Eastern Ontario university town have drawn criticism from local residents and former calls for greater cooperation to curb the spread of COVID-19. I think it's interesting and funny that Black Lives Matter protests, or protests that are approved by the government for whatever reason, or approved by universities because they're tackling racism or injustice somehow, that's okay. But when university students get together and do exactly the same thing or similar things, right? That's not okay. And somebody said, oh, it's inside, not outside. And then there was a conversation about the brass rail having like 550 people exposed and 14 cases and nobody in the hospital. Like, it's fear for fear's sake. And this response is crazy, considering how many cases are active currently in Kingston. Okay, back to this. Police and city officials in Kingston, Ontario say they've had to close a popular pier and beach due to crowding and issues a number of tickets since thousands of students flooded back into the city earlier this month. Local residents said they've also taken to the streets to break up parties in recent days. Jeff Masuda, a Queen's University professor, spent the early morning hours of Sunday on the long weekend trying to get dozens of Queen's students, his neighbors, to stop partying and to abide by COVID-19 laws. It didn't work. Shocking. The maskless group shouted, drank, and tossed beer bottles while hanging out outside and ignoring physical distancing guidelines. He said some yelled at the two police officers who were called to the area to deal with them, and he said while others took off to continue the night elsewhere. The region has gone largely unscathed by COVID-19. There's currently one active case of the disease and 112 cases in total since the novel coronavirus made it to Canada. No one has died from the disease. Yeah, like that's a big overreaction, I think. They could be focusing on some other things, but instead, here's Doug Ford. I can't wait for the remix on this. I don't think this is going to go over well, but I think we'll watch it because it's funny.
Guys, you're the best and the brightest in the world, in my opinion. Show it. No more parties. I just can't stress it enough. I don't want to sound like, some dad lecturing you. I'm just talking to you as a friend, as a premier. Don't go to these parties, because what affects these school numbers with the cases of COVID is going to be community spread. Guys, you're the best and the brightest in the world, in my opinion.
I think that he put the track, like the music track behind it, so that the steeper or whoever does those music tracks can't remix it, because like that's gonna be remixed. I'm looking forward to the remix of that. 5 Northern Alberta schools get the green light to go mask free. Dr. Dina Hinshaw approved a plan that allows students attending classes in the Lacrete and Buffalo Head Prairie areas in northern Alberta to move through hallways and common areas with their faces uncovered. Here's TIFF. TIFF is, I think, from what I can tell, they're backing off of their mask by choice, because one of these tweets says you have to have mandatory masks. Here it is. As no food or beverage will be consumed on site, TIFF requires that masks are worn for the entirety of the time patrons are in the TIFF Bell Lightbox, including while seated during screenings. So yesterday it was reported that masks were not mandatory, and now it seems that they were, but this is September 8th. So maybe I'm missing something, but I wanted to update that. They've got all sorts of guidelines and lower seating capacities and all this other stuff that they're saying is to keep people safe. I think that it's all of these COVID things. If you look at Sweden and look at what they did, which is very little, they're almost back to normal. I don't understand why we're not following their successful model. why we're still saying Justin Trudeau said yesterday, the only way back to normalcy is through a vaccine. Really? Really? There's an effective treatment with a safe drug and hydroxychloroquine. All the evidence that I've seen, and doctors have backed this up on multiple times that have been scrubbed. I have no reason to disbelieve that. I've every reason to be suspicious of a government that doesn't acknowledge that. So, I mean, it seems really strange to continue these farcical lockdowns and all of the other stuff. But, I mean, I don't know. Rocco Galati was saying, or people were telling me that the November was the timeline, and I went and had a watch. And so this seems like a long time. Like we're gonna have the presidential election behind us before anything is litigated on this. So man, it seems like there's very little hope of a reasonable response in the short term, and that's frustrating. Moving on, you guys remember when Volkswagen lied about its emissions and like just really lied, and people were saying, oh, this could bankrupt the company? Well, here's Holly Doan. Ontario judge defends out of court settlement over misconduct by Volkswagen at a fraction of the cost of U.S. penalties. Yeah, well, I just thought it's very interesting. It's very interesting, our legal system, isn't it? Who gets the book thrown at them and who's like, oh, well, you tried, SNC Lavalin. Here's Michael Geist, and he's a well-known columnist about technology, law professor, Canadian research chair in internet and e-commerce law. And if he's concerned about this, I'm concerned about this. He says Heritage Minister S. Galibo just told culture groups his upcoming bill will give the CRTC the power to intervene in payments by Netflix, Amazon Prime, Spotify, and regulate online CanCon. Massive internet regulation structure led by the CRTC coming. Is Navdeep Bains on board? So that's concerning. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. That's terribly, terribly frustrating because we should have a free internet. We should have a free internet. And without that, my goodness, how would you reasonably get, how would you have a conversation with people, right? John Tory won't hesitate to push for cancellation of trick-or-treating if health officials deem it too risky. I don't want them to cancel Halloween. If you can go to a grocery store, you can go door to door and pick up a candy, right? I mean, if you want to have somebody dump it from a box into a bowl and have tongs, like, I don't know. You can do trick or treating, I think. And I don't know. I would love to know the mechanism for canceling Halloween, right? Like, I understand. Well, I mean, like you can have emergency orders to order people inside, but like, really, you're not allowed to knock on doors tonight. No knocking on doors. Like, time for some civil disobedience, everyone. Put on your costumes. Don't forget to mask up. The one night of the year, I'll tell you to do that. So this was back to the Toronto shooting. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on from the federal government just blatantly ignoring. And maybe, tell me if I've got this wrong, but I think that this is a good guide, like a rule of thumb. If your big federal, big spending package goes against one of the main province's human rights policies, maybe you should check that with somebody. Check that with somebody who's willing to tell you no. Oh, right. You kick all those people out of caucus, don't you, Justin Trudeau? Okay. So, and I just think it's wrongheaded. I think it's wrongheaded to make a litmus test someone's skin color. I think it's wrongheaded to make a litmus test, or to incentivize financial institutions to give loans. If you want to help businesses, stop taxing them, right? Like, and just give a universal tax rate that's fair. Like, this is not rocket science. There are successful models that we can replicate in Canada. And instead, it's like Justin Trudeau's rolling some dice and saying, yeah, maybe we'll do this. Maybe this will distract the Canadian public enough, right? Just call them racist long enough. Watch what happens. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Okay, that's enough out of me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. And I'm going to try and do my second video in the series today. I had to do some cleanup on the story. It has to flow. It has to tell the story accurately, right? Because that's important, right? It's definitely important to tell the story as it happened. And so that's what I'm doing. So look for the second installment today. I've got it all mapped out, and it's in my head, so I've just got to put it out there. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful